Ninth episode begins with Erica Ortegas recording a personal log. The USS Enterprise is investigating a mysterious corner of space. Ortegas puts on an EV suit. Enterprise has located an area characterized by inexplicable gravity waves. Even Spock can't figure out what's going on. Nyota Uhura reports that probes are ineffective. Hence, they will need a shuttle with an expert pilot to make sense of the area. But only Ortegas can board the shuttle, tasked with dropping an observational buoy. Soon, Ortegas is aboard the shuttle Archimedes, exiting Enterprise's shuttle bay. She will be navigating not by visuals, but by gravitational imaging. On Enterprise's bridge, Christopher Pike asks Una for a status report. Ortegas contacts the bridge and compares the flight to ancient Earth planes flying into a hurricane. Acknowledging she's enjoying herself, Pike instructs Ortegas to return home, but Archimedes shakes. A wormhole appears from nowhere. Una says sensors must have somehow missed it, but it's right atop Ortegas' position. Uhura tries to tell Ortegas to return, but the wormhole disrupts comms. All that comes through is the computer's report on Archimedes' degrading hull integrity. The Archimedes vanishes into the wormhole. The Archimedes arrives on the other end of the wormhole. It's stuck in the gravity well of a gas giant. Ortegas records a distress message on the probe and ejects it. The Archimedes crash lands on a moon in the gas giant's ring. Later, she finds that her rations have been destroyed in the crash. Ortegas records a personal log, reciting the damage but stating that her survival is a victory. She hopes the buoy can transmit her mayday through the wormhole. Then, the computer she's recording on gives out. Ortegas needs water, food, and shelter. She begins using parts from the ruined shuttle to build a water condenser. After a long wait, the condenser produces a small amount of water. Now for the next survival problem, food. She's got a knife, fire cube, and flare. The air outside is breathable-ish. The moon's a barren landscape filled with rocks. On the moon, Ortegas talks to herself as she searches for signs of food. But it isn't looking promising. And then, non-specific seismic activity shakes the surface. Ortegas does some quick calculations based on sensor readings. The ring isn't symmetrical, and as it rotates, the moon will pass close by the gas giant. This will dip the moon into the gas giant's toxic soup atmosphere. Ortegas needs to find food and get back to the shuttle within a few hours. On Enterprise, Spock informs Pike that they still haven't found anything. Una reports that the constellation is asking for an update. Then, Uhura picks up the mayday from Ortegas. Uhura is confident it came from the other side of the wormhole. She insists Ortegas is alive. Uhura suggests sending probes through the wormhole to strengthen their signal. Pike instructs Una to inform Captain Deckard that they are dealing with a situation, but still plan to rendezvous on schedule. On the moon, Ortegas spots a hooded figure, a Gorn. The Gorn returns to its shelter. Ortegas hides behind a rock, but then a noise distracts her. When she looks back, the Gorn is gone. But it turns out it snuck up behind her and grabs her. It holds her over a crater. A large insect emerges from the crater, and the Gorn tosses Ortegas aside. It captures the insect and walks away, leaving Ortegas behind. On Enterprise, Uhura's tests fail 20 times. Uhura resets the simulation to try again. Spock says the results suggest the rescue mission is improbable. He says Pike is unlikely to authorize the mission, but Uhura persists. On the moon, Ortegas watches the Gorn tear the insect to pieces. She observes that the Gorn has an injured leg. Ortegas is still operating under the assumption that the Gorn wants to eat her. Instead, the Gorn throws Ortegas a chunk of insect meat. Ortegas is confused but realizes the Gorn could have killed her earlier if it wanted to. Out of starvation, Ortegas seizes upon the meat. When the Gorn is sleeping, Ortegas approaches the encampment. She spots a Gorn comms array and states she could use it. Sneaking inside the shelter, she absconds with it. She's nearly back to the shuttle when she sees an inexplicable twinkle in the sky. Then the shuttle abruptly sinks into the ground. As she traverses the surface, she again encounters the giant insects. One of them is about to attack her, but the Gorn arrives just in time and pushes her aside, being bitten in the process. It activates a force field that bisects the insect and encompasses both Ortegas and the Gorn. On Enterprise, Pike arrives in the lab. Spock informs him that Uhura has an unconventional plan. Spock says a shuttle won't make it safely through the wormhole. Instead, Uhura proposes taking Enterprise through the wormhole. This would require creating a stable warp field around Enterprise. This would act as a wedge, forcing the wormhole to remain open. Pike asks about the vaccine. Uhura says they can try it once and cut it off if it doesn't work. Pike will agree if the scan capability remains above 60%. Uhura's data shows it will be 56%, but she changes the data to 61% and shows that figure to Pike. Pike agrees to the rescue mission. On the moon, the Gorn and Ortegas return to the Gorn's shelter. She realizes the comms array power source is powering a force field for the encampment. Ortegas offers to wrap up the Gorn's leg in exchange for sleeping there. The Gorn wants Ortegas to use a crystal-based paste on the wound. As Ortegas treats the wound, she wonders what she's doing. Then, Ortegas spots the Gorn's helmet. Using crude sign language, the pair begins to communicate. They're both pilots. Later, Ortegas modifies her tricorder so it will serve as a rudimentary translator. It will only give yes or no responses. Ortegas realizes the Gorn can understand her because it wants to understand its enemy. The Gorn doesn't like it on the planet either, and she's female. Soon, Ortegas is teaching the Gorn to play two-dimensional chess. Later, the Gorn teaches Ortegas to play a Gorn board game. The pieces are carved from bones. When Ortegas wins, the Gorn instructs her to eat the final captured piece. Ortegas mimes doing so, but secrets the piece away instead. Later, Ortegas is working on getting the comms array into an SOS beacon. Ortegas says her people will be searching for her. She is successful, and the device begins charging, but the Gorn isn't enthusiastic. Ortegas notes the wormhole continues to shrink. She wonders why sensors didn't detect the wormhole, why the tricorder didn't pick up the Gorn's shelter, and what the flashes of light in the sky are. Ortegas says it feels like someone's watching them. Later, Ortegas realizes the Gorn's leg is infected. She needs to get more of the crystals that make the salve. Ortegas says the infection will be fatal if it spreads. Over the Gorn's protests, Ortegas leaves to find the crystals. On Enterprise, Spock sits in the center seat. Former test pilot Pike has taken up Ortegas' customary position at the helm. Uhura feels guilty about her deception. Enterprise penetrates the wormhole and parks halfway through. It will wedge the wormhole open for a little bit, but if they stay too long, Enterprise will be crushed. They pick up the Mayday, but there's no information on where Ortegas may have crashed, and there are over 300 moons. Scanning every moon will take more time than they have if they're going to make the rendezvous. But Pike tells them to begin scanning, as they may get lucky. Ortegas sees the flickering light in the sky as she harvests crystals, but she's interrupted by the arrival of another giant insect. She uses fire to repel the pursuit just as she reaches the shelter. It's effective, but it knocks out the battery powering the array's battery as well as the shelter's force field. The shelter is now exposed to the storms and the insects. Of course, a storm is on the way. Ortegas realizes she could use the flare to ignite part of the gas giant's atmosphere. This will create a visible SOS. They will have to wait for the storm to be on top of them to execute this plan. Ortegas acknowledges it's a gamble over the Gorn's protestations. However, she's confident it's their chance to escape. The Gorn reveals a thruster pack filled with propellant. Launching this into the storm could create a huge explosion, but they will be at the center of a giant fireball if they do. Ortegas finds part of the Gorn's escape pod heat shield. They can use this to protect themselves from the fireball. Ortegas begins to lose hope, but the Gorn puts her hand on Ortegas' shoulder and says it isn't pointless. The Gorn says they are friends. Ortegas continues to prepare her plan to ignite the storm. She and the Gorn hide beneath the heat shield. The storm arrives, and Ortegas attempts to launch the pack remotely. Over the Gorn's protestations, Ortegas runs out and ignites it manually. The explosion is immense. She retreats into the heat shield's shelter. She and the Gorn hold hands as the explosion surrounds them. On Enterprise, they spot the explosion Ortegas created. Pike orders La'an to take a landing party to the moon's surface and retrieve Ortegas. Soon, La'an and the landing party beam onto the moon's surface. Exhausted, Ortegas and the Gorn emerge from the heat shield shelter. The Gorn crouches to protect Ortegas, but La'an shoots and kills the Gorn. Ortegas screams. She addresses the flickering light in the sky, demanding to know who they are and what they want. La'an orders Enterprise to beam them up. But La'an and the others freeze mid-beam. Only Ortegas is still moving. Suddenly, a figure appears. It's the Metron. They are an ancient species, and they put the Gorn and Ortegas together as an experiment. They point out that Ortegas and the Gorn moved past their issues and became friends. However, the Metron says they will need more data to determine if the human and the Gorn will ever become allies. Furthermore, they say Ortegas isn't ready to meet them. She won't remember this meeting. And they continue that they may one day have to reset your perception of the Gorn as well. Ortegas asks what she will remember. The Metron says her experience, which was genuine. Ortegas looks at the dead Gorn. Then the Metron unpauses time. Ortegas, La'an, and the away team beam away. Uhura visits Ortegas in her quarters. Ortegas acknowledges Uhura's efforts to get her back. Ortegas tells Uhura that the Gorn saved her and was her friend. But she says La'an is her friend too. She doesn't know what to do with that. Uhura says they both wanted to protect her. Ortegas asks what she does now. Uhura says, "You remember her." Ortegas looks at the bone piece from the Gorn game, sitting on her shelf of mementos.